I showed up at the reading of my father's will, in a clean black suit. Same one I wore to his funeral a week earlier. My tie was tight, but my throat was tighter. I wasn't there for money. I was there for closure. I was there to hear my father's final words written in ink. I didn't expect a thank you or even a special mention, but I expected to be acknowledged. Instead, the lawyer opened the folder, read 3 lines, and closed it. She got everything. My stepmother, Clarice. The house, the business, the savings, the retirement accounts, even the truck he promised me when I was 16. My name wasn't mentioned once. She didn't look at me, just gathered her purse like she already knew. Like this was a formality. I sat there frozen, not angry, not heartbroken, just still. Because when someone tries to erase you from your own bloodline, you don't react, you remember. You remember every birthday she skipped, every visit she blocked, every "he's too tired to talk" message she sent while I sat outside the hospital parking lot, just hoping to see his face. You remember what it felt like to be treated like a guest in the house you grew up in. To watch your last name shrink in your father's world, while hers expanded like a storm cloud. They thought I'd yell, thought I'd cause a scene, thought I'd beg for a piece of the legacy I was born into. I didn't. I stood up, shook the lawyer's hand, looked Clarice in the eyes and said 4 words she didn't understand at the time. He left me more. She thought she won. But she forgot one thing. My father was never stupid, and I was never weak. So no, I didn't get his estate that day. But I did get something else, a voice memo, a handwritten note, and a key to the safe deposit box she never knew existed. And now, I'm going to tell you the truth they buried. Welcome to Betrayal HQ Stories, where silence isn't surrender. It's the beginning of strategy. If you've ever been pushed aside, cut out, or underestimated, you're not alone here. Hit subscribe and let me show you what real justice sounds like when the shouting stops. Before all this, before lawyers and courtrooms and cold stares over inheritance, I lived in a world built on quiet loyalty. My father's world, a small brick house on the edge of a quiet street, where porch lights flickered at sunset and everybody knew which driveway belonged to whom. We weren't flashy. We didn't take vacations. We didn't throw big birthday parties. But every morning, at 6:15 sharp, I could hear my father's boots hit the kitchen floor. Always the same sound, steady, worn-down leather meeting tile like clockwork. He'd hum as he made his coffee. 1 sugar, no cream. That was his rhythm, the way he moved through life. Steady, simple, strong. And I learned to mirror it. We ran a family business together. He founded it when I was a kid. A small electrical repair shop. Nothing glamorous, but it was ours. Saturdays were for restocking shelves. Sundays were for church and home-cooked meals. And weekdays were spent side by side under car hoods, behind breaker panels, or filling out invoices in the back office. He never said "I love you" in words, but he handed it to me every day, in the form of packed lunches, lessons in wiring, quiet nods of approval. I didn't grow up with hugs and stories. I grew up with trust. My mom passed when I was in college, and that was the first time I saw my father bend. Not break, just bend. Like a strong branch carrying too much snow. He cried once, at her grave. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We take care of each other now." And we did. I delayed moving out, paid the bills, cooked dinners. We shared silence better than most people share words. That was my world. Quiet mornings, loyal routines, and a man who didn't just raise me, he built me. I never imagined that one day, someone would step in and try to rewrite all of that. That a woman could walk into our story halfway through and convince him to erase the son who knew the first half by heart. But back then, I didn't see the storm coming. Back then, everything felt solid, familiar, safe. And maybe that's what made the betrayal cut so deep. Not because she changed everything, but because I thought nothing could. After my mother passed, the house got quiet in a different kind of way. Not peaceful, just empty. My father started leaving the porch light on longer than usual. He'd sit in his chair past midnight, TV off, just staring. For the first time, I felt like the adult in the house. I'd ask him what he wanted for dinner. He'd shrug. I'd ask if he needed help at the shop. He'd already be dressed, pretending he didn't. Then came Clarice. She didn't arrive like a thunderstorm. She crept in like fog, slow, quiet, and hard to read. I met her on a Tuesday evening. Dad called me home early, said he had someone he wanted me to meet. I remember the way she smiled when I walked through the door, wide, too wide. The kind of smile that said, "I've already decided how I want you to feel about me." She had this way of speaking that was too polished, too sweet, like she rehearsed how to be warm. "You must be the famous son," she said. I smiled, politely, but something in me paused. Famous? That word felt like a mask, like she'd already formed a script and I was just a character she hadn't studied yet. Clarice was different from my mom in every way. Where my mother was soft-spoken and patient, Clarice filled the room. She redecorated the living room within a month, tossed out the old couch, moved the family photos off the hallway wall, and replaced them with abstract art and gold-framed mirrors. I came over one evening to grab some tools and noticed our childhood pictures were stacked in a box near the coat closet. When I asked about it, she smiled and said, "Just decluttering for a fresh start." My father said nothing. He was quieter around her, more reserved. But he looked happy, and for a while that was enough for me to stay silent. Then came the decisions. She started handling his medications, his calendar, even who could visit. When Aunt Sheila, the only living sister my father had, came by unannounced, Clarice told her he was resting and couldn't have company. I overheard the tone once, sharp, dismissive. "This is my house now, Sheila. You should call first." Aunt Sheila told me later, "Something ain't right with her. That woman looks at people like puzzles, figuring out where to cut, not where to fit." And still, I stayed polite. Then it was the business. She started coming to the shop, at first just to bring him lunch. Then she started sitting in on meetings, whispering things to him, changing vendor contracts. One day I walked in, and she was sitting at his desk, my father standing nearby, holding coffee like he was the assistant. She looked at me and said, "Oh good, you're here. We've made some adjustments to the payment schedule." I didn't say anything, just nodded, and told myself, don't start a war over a seat. But something was shifting. People around us started treating her like the center. And me, I became the helpful son, the loyal one, the silent one. And that silence was exactly what she needed to keep pushing me out of the picture. It's funny how betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it walks in with a casserole dish and compliments. That was Clarice's strategy. Never confrontational, just calculated. She didn't need to argue with me to take power. She just needed to keep looking like she had it. I remember the first time I felt completely out of place in my own father's life. It was a Friday. I stopped by the house after work like I always did. My routine hadn't changed in years. Walk in, set my tool bag down, check in on him, maybe grab a sandwich. This time, I walked in and found her standing in the kitchen. She turned around with a smile, one of those wide frozen ones that shows teeth but not soul. "Oh, you didn't call," she said. "I didn't know I had to," I replied, half laughing. She tilted her head, smile still plastered on. "We're trying to keep his stress down. Too many surprises, you know." That stung. Not because of the words, but because my father was standing 5 feet away, sipping tea, pretending he hadn't heard. That was the beginning of the rewrite. My father and I had a bond built on years of sweat, silence, and side-by-side work. He never said much, but he always looked at me with pride. That nod from him, that quiet pat on the back after a long day, that was my emotional anchor. I didn't need a crowd. I didn't need applause. All I ever wanted was to keep my father's name clean and carry it with honor. That shop we built, it wasn't just income. It was legacy. The day I caught her in his office, rifling through client folders and payment books, I paused in the doorway. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide it. She just said without even looking up, "Your father trusts me with everything now." And for a second I felt like a guest in the company I helped build. Still, I swallowed it. Still, I told myself, don't break your father's peace just to protect your pride. But peace doesn't mean silence. And Clarice had figured that out long before I had. She started answering his phone, reviewing emails, scheduling his appointments, making financial suggestions. She stopped saying "your father" and started saying "we." We changed the insurance. We updated the business structure. We don't think you need to be involved in every meeting. And every time she said "we," I felt my father's name getting further and further away from mine. But I held on, because what mattered most to me wasn't a title or a paycheck. It was that when my father passed on, the name he built wouldn't be worn by someone who didn't bleed for it. It was never about the money. It was about the meaning. And I could feel her reaching for both. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it hard to name. There was no explosive fight, no dramatic scene, just changes. Little ones. Things you don't notice until they stack high enough to cast a shadow. It started with silence. Dad stopped calling me in the evenings. We used to talk every night, quick check-ins about the shop, or which tools we needed to replace, or just "you good son?" But the calls dried up. I told myself maybe he was tired. Maybe the new medication made him groggy. Then came the late payments. Vendors started calling me directly, asking why invoices were late. I checked the records. The money had been moved, paid to someone new, contracts rewritten. But when I asked my father, he brushed it off, said Clarice was streamlining things. Streamlining. That was her favorite word. The kind of word that sounds smart, but feels like erasure. Then there was the locked drawer. His old file cabinet in the office, the one where he kept everything from my birth certificate to business licenses, was suddenly locked. He'd never locked it before. I asked where the key was. Clarice answered before he could. "We've moved the important stuff to a safer location." We. Again, always we. One night I dropped by unexpectedly. The house was quiet, but not empty. Her voice floated from the hallway. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone, it wasn't sweet. It was sharp, aggressive. I heard my father respond with a sigh. Not anger, just exhaustion, like a man too tired to fight. I called out. Her voice changed instantly, light, sugary. "Oh, we didn't know you were coming by tonight." I stayed for 15 minutes. She made coffee. I drank it in silence. She smiled, but her smile didn't match her eyes. I left with my stomach tight and my mind louder than ever. Then came the texts. Late one night, I got a bank alert. Funds withdrawn from a joint account I didn't even know existed. The amount wasn't small. I asked my father about it the next morning. He looked confused. Then Clarice stepped in. That was for a home repair. You weren't looped in because we didn't want to worry you. But it was my childhood home. The pipes were new. The roof was still under warranty. There was no repair. Something was shifting. Not openly, not violently, just underground. Like a quiet sinkhole forming under everything I thought was solid. And still, I said nothing. Because when you've spent your whole life honoring someone, the last thing you want to believe is that someone else is slowly convincing them not to honor you back. When my father got sick, everything that had been shifting beneath the surface finally cracked wide open. But before I take you there, I need you to remember the man before the illness. The one who stood at my Little League games in steel-toe boots because he didn't have time to change after work, but wouldn't miss it for anything. The man who, when we lost power in a winter storm, didn't panic. He lit the fireplace, pulled out old board games, and said, "This is just camping with walls." The man who taught me how to patch drywall, change brake pads, and treat everyone like their time was more valuable than yours. That man was sharp, precise. He paid his bills early. He knew every inch of wiring in his shop and every detail of our business. So when Clarice started saying things like the doctors said it's best he rests, or he's been forgetting little things lately, I paused, because the man I knew didn't forget. Not his son's birthday, not an unpaid invoice, not the combination to the safe. I tried to visit him, knocked on the door one Sunday afternoon. No answer. I called. She picked up, said he wasn't feeling well again, that it wasn't a good time. That phrase, it became a wall between us. Not a good time. 2 weeks passed. I didn't see him, not once. So I stopped by the shop, hoping to catch him there. He was sitting in the back office, alone, slumped in a chair he used to sit tall in. The air was stale, files were out of place, coffee half drunk. He looked up, smiled weakly, and said, "Hey son." My heart cracked right there. He reached for the thermostat, missed it the first time. His hands, once steady enough to thread wires blindfolded, trembled slightly. I sat across from him and asked, "How long have you been feeling like this?" He looked at the door, paused, then said, "Clarice says it's just stress." Clarice says, not I feel, not I think. I nodded, but my gut was screaming. Later that week, I got a call from the pharmacy. Prescription changes, pickups under her name, a new medication added, sedating. I didn't approve it, neither did he, but his signature was on the file. And when I asked him about it, he said, "She said the doctor recommended it." I trust her to handle all that now. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't just sick, he was being managed. And the man who once taught me how to fix anything was now unreachable in a house I used to walk into without knocking. I thought I had time. I thought that even with the sickness, with the distance, with the quiet changes, there would still be a moment to step in, to protect what he built. But I didn't realize she had already moved the pieces. And by the time I opened my eyes, she had already played the final move. It started with the office key. I went to the shop one morning, like I'd done for over a decade, to open up. Same door, same key. But when I slid it in, it didn't turn. I tried again. And again, nothing. I stood there, in front of the door my father and I painted together, in front of the glass where our names used to be stenciled side by side, J. Holt & Son Electrical. Now it just said Holt Solutions LLC. New logo, new name, no son. I called him straight to voicemail. I called her, she picked up, calm, sweet. "Oh, didn't he tell you? We had the locks changed after the incident last week." The incident? There were concerns about inventory security, she said. Too many people had access. We're tightening things up. Too many people, meaning me. I stood there for a moment, then hung up. I didn't argue, didn't ask questions. I just stood there in front of the shop I helped build from the foundation up, shut out like I was a stranger trying to break in. And what burned more than the lock was that he didn't stop it, not because he didn't love me, but because she'd convinced him that love meant letting go, that the business is in better hands now. A week later, I got a notice in the mail, addressed to me, but stamped by their new attorney. Legal restructuring of the company. I was no longer listed as an operational partner. No meeting, no conversation, just a formality in black and white. "You're no longer needed." She did it without raising her voice, without a scene. Just a few conversations behind closed doors. A few documents passed across a table. And that was the first time I cried. Not loud, not in front of anyone, just alone in my truck, parked behind the shop I no longer had access to. I sat there and remembered the day we bought our first company van. How he let me pick the color. How proud he looked when we stuck our names on the side. And now, it was just her name, her hands, her decisions. And I realized, this wasn't just about power, it was about erasure, and she was good at it. So I did the only thing a man can do when someone tries to erase his name. I stopped knocking, I stopped calling, and I started watching. Because some betrayals don't come with yelling. They come with calm voices, legal letters, and locked doors. I sat in my truck, engine still humming, hands still on the steering wheel, but I wasn't going anywhere. The shop lights were on behind me, the same lights I used to flip on every morning at 6:45 while Dad brewed the first pot of coffee. But now, Someone else had flipped them on. Someone else was inside, and I was out here. I stared through the windshield, eyes blurry, chest tight, throat dry. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was stunned. How the hell did we get here? One day you're being taught how to hold a wrench, how to wire a panel, how to tell the difference between a man who shakes your hand and a man who'll stab it. Then one day, the man who taught you all that forgets your name when it comes time to sign a will. And you wonder, was I ever really in this? Or was I just keeping it warm for someone else to claim? I thought loyalty was a shield, that if I just stayed faithful, stayed respectful, stayed quiet, that truth would win. But maybe truth isn't loud enough when someone else has the microphone. I thought about every time I backed down to keep peace. Every time I smiled when I wanted to question. Every time I told myself it's not worth the fight. But now, I had nothing to fight for. Not the business, not the house, not even my place in the story. I was erased with a signature, rewritten by someone who wasn't even there for the first half of the book. I turned the key off, sat in silence. No music, no calls, just the low click of an engine cooling. And in that silence, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. She didn't just want what my father owned. She wanted the story rewritten with her at the center. And me, just a footnote. A line crossed out in a will no one thought I'd ever see. But I wasn't a footnote. I was the reason he had something to leave behind at all. And if they thought I was going to disappear quietly, they forgot one thing. My father taught me how to build. And now, I was going to build something else. A truth they couldn't bury. A legacy they couldn't steal. But first, I had to let the silence finish speaking. I found out my father died through a text message. Not a phone call. Not a knock at my door. Just a message that read, "Your father passed this morning. We're handling arrangements. Please don't come by the house today." That was it. No time, no place, no chance to say goodbye. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe that was how the story ended. He died in the same house we built together, the one where I patched drywall after a storm, the one I painted 3 times while he stood on the lawn making jokes about uneven coats. Clarice was there. I wasn't, but let me tell you something you didn't know. 5 years ago, when my dad's business nearly collapsed after a bad investment, guess who covered payroll out of their own savings? Me. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask for credit. I just walked into the bank, moved money, and signed the check. Because he asked, because he was my father. He never brought it up again, never repaid it, never needed to. Because that's what family does. When Clarice wanted to launch her interior design business, guess who helped her set up the LLC paperwork? Me. She forgot that. Or maybe she never cared to remember. My loyalty didn't come from fear. It came from blood, from legacy. I covered his mistakes, protected his name. When my cousin accused him of underpaying for a job, I defended him. Even though I saw the numbers, even though I knew my cousin wasn't lying. I carried things, heavy things, and I never said a word, because I believed, if nothing else, that when the dust settled, he would remember. But when that will was read, when the lawyer unfolded that sheet of paper and my name wasn't even on it, I realized something darker. He didn't forget me. She made him doubt me. And I let it happen, because I believed that love would outlast whispers, that loyalty would survive silence. But I was wrong. She'd rewritten more than the documents. She rewrote his memory of me. And now, I had nothing but the truth I'd carried for years, the kind no lawyer could see, the kind no inheritance could measure. But even the truth has a breaking point, and mine was finally here. I showed up to the lawyer's office 2 weeks after the funeral, alone, in a pressed shirt, clean shoes, folder in hand, because I believed in formality, even when I knew the room would be filled with dishonor. Clarice sat across from me. Pearl earrings, black dress, same smile she wore at the cemetery. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and said this won't take long. And it didn't, because I wasn't in it. Not once. No mention of the son who co-signed the mortgage on the second property. No mention of the man who sat in the passenger seat for 20 years of electrical service calls. No mention of the boy who once held his father's hand during his mother's burial and said, "I'll take care of you now." Instead, everything was left to Clarice. The house, the business, the savings, the retirement account, the truck, the land behind the workshop. She got it all. The room didn't spin. My heart didn't race. I just blinked, once, and in that single blink, every sacrifice I'd made, every moment I bit my tongue, every quiet act of love I thought would be enough, vanished. She didn't gloat. She didn't have to. She simply folded the documents into her purse, stood up and said, he just wanted peace at the end. I made sure he had it. Peace. Peace to her meant removing me. And what cut deeper than the inheritance was the thought that maybe, just maybe, he believed her. That she convinced him I was a risk, a threat, a name to leave off. I walked to my car with a slow, practiced calm, sat down, closed the door, and that's when I saw it on the back seat. A box, sealed, no label. I opened it. Inside, a bundle of old photos, me and him. The shop in its first year, Mom on the porch smiling with paint on her shirt. And a note. Just 4 words in his handwriting. Protect what matters most. I stared at those words like they were oxygen, and that's when it hit me. She thought she won, But she didn't know what he left me. She thought she buried me with the will. But I had something stronger, his trust, his truth, his voice. And now, I was done grieving. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to post online. I was going to investigate. Because if she changed the will, if she lied to him while I stood silent, then she just made the worst mistake of her life. She made an honest man angry. And there's nothing more dangerous than a son with nothing to lose and everything to prove. I didn't yell. I didn't storm into her house or demand explanations. I didn't even text back when she sent that fake sympathy message the next morning. He really loved you. He just didn't know how to say it. No, I said nothing. Because when you know someone has stolen from you, the worst thing you can do is let them know you've noticed. So I smiled, replied, thanks. I'm sure he did. Then I got to work. I called my father's old lawyer, the one who helped him set up the business 2 decades ago. He hadn't heard from him in over a year. He sounded surprised when I mentioned Clarice. Even more surprised when I told him she'd handled the final will. Next, I visited the bank. Quiet, alone, no appointment. I asked if there were any safe deposit boxes under my father's name. The teller hesitated, asked for ID. Then she returned with a manager. There was one, still active. Inside, a voice memo stored on a USB drive, a handwritten note in my father's shaky script, and a timeline of account changes Clarice never thought I'd find. He knew something wasn't right. And he didn't know who to trust. So he left breadcrumbs for the only person he hoped would follow them, me. So I kept following. I went back to the office and pulled old tax records, dates, signatures, beneficiaries. The handwriting on the new will, too smooth, too perfect. I knew my father's script. I knew the way his G's looped and how his R's leaned when he was tired. This wasn't him. I found his medical records, compared the timeline, the date the new will was signed. He was sedated. I didn't need drama. I didn't need confrontation. I needed proof. And slowly, silently, I was collecting it. Every bank withdrawal, every document change, every whisper she thought would vanish. I built a case the same way he built the business, brick by brick, quietly, carefully. And while she toasted to her win, I was drafting my opening argument. Because what she didn't understand is that silence isn't weakness. It's a weapon, and I'd spent my whole life learning how to use it. I didn't slam doors. I didn't make a scene. That's not how men like my father raise sons like me. Instead, I adjusted. I stopped paying the business utilities. Quietly, the lights at the shop went out on a Thursday. The staff called her. She blamed a billing error. I called the city and canceled the service in my name. No warning, no announcement, just a click. She didn't notice that the web domain, holtsolutions.com, was still registered under my profile. I logged in, froze it, updated the contact information to a blank. Then I pulled the business EIN history, cross-referenced it with the IRS. The original tax records, still tied to me, still showing my ownership. She had skipped a step. I made a single call to a forensic accountant, sent the voice memo, sent the handwritten note, sent the timeline. He didn't say much, just "You've got something here, something real." She was playing checkers. I was moving chess pieces that hadn't been touched in years. I started recording every phone call, every voicemail, every accidental admission. "Your dad said I could handle it all. You don't need to be involved anymore. It's over." He trusted me more than anyone else in the end. I saved every word, dated them, logged them. She didn't notice when her name stopped appearing in vendor systems, or when I contacted his oldest clients and let them know the business might be restructuring soon. I didn't threaten. I didn't accuse. I documented. And then, one Monday morning, I had the papers served, right to her doorstep. No warning, no heads up, just a knock. She opened the door, found a stranger in a suit, an envelope in his hand. Her name printed on it in bold. Inside, a lawsuit, forgery of legal documents, undue influence over a vulnerable adult, fraudulent inheritance claims, backed by timestamps, recordings, medical records, and a note in my father's own handwriting. She called me later that day. 6 times. I didn't answer. The 7th time, she left a message. Her voice wasn't smug anymore. It shook. "Why are you doing this?" I sat in my truck, same place I sat the day I got locked out, played that message back one more time, then smiled. Because for the first time in this whole story, she was finally on the outside. And I was just getting started. I sat in my living room that night. Lights off, just the soft glow of the TV screen playing something I wasn't watching. Legal documents scattered across the coffee table, receipts, medical reports, voice transcripts, truth. But I couldn't help asking myself, was it worth it? Maybe I should have walked away. Maybe I should have let them have it all. The house, the business, the name. Maybe legacy isn't something you fight for. Maybe it's something you surrender to silence. I kept thinking about my dad's last months, how I wasn't there, how she made sure of that. But still, I wasn't. Would he be proud of this, of what I'm doing? Or would he shake his head and say, "Let it go, son. Let them take the things. You keep the peace." I'd been raised on that kind of thinking. Stoicism, stillness. Real men don't chase what's already gone. But then, what's left when you let them take everything? What's left when the people who never held the weight get to carry the reward? I looked at my hands. Rough, calloused. The same hands that wired the first ceiling fan in Dad's shop. The same hands that painted Mom's front porch the summer before she passed. These hands had built something, carried something, buried something, but now they were carrying a different kind of weight. Not hammers, not wrenches, but evidence, proof, revenge, and it was heavy in a different way. I asked myself, was I becoming her? Was I letting bitterness rot what little peace I had left? Because the truth is, winning doesn't always feel like justice. Sometimes, it just feels like a colder kind of grief. But then I remembered the note, my father's handwriting. 4 words, protect what matters most. And I realized, this isn't about revenge. This is about restoration, about truth, about making sure the story ends the way it started, with honor. So I leaned back, took a breath, and I whispered to myself, finish it, not for you, for him. Every con artist has one fatal flaw. They start to believe their own performance. Clarice was no different. She'd moved through my father's final months like a shadow, unseen, unbothered, untouchable. But greed has a habit of making even the smartest thieves sloppy. It was the gala, a charity event she threw in honor of my late husband. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. I had a friend on the inside, an old vendor who used to work with my father before Clarice rewrote all the contracts. He sent me a video, just 27 seconds long. Clarice, standing under a chandelier, champagne in hand, talking too loud, laughing too hard, surrounded by donors who didn't know the history behind the legacy they were clapping for. And then she said it, clear as day. I'm just glad everything's in my name now. He left it all to me, and not a dime to that boy who kept hanging around like a bad memory. The crowd chuckled politely. They didn't know who she meant, but I did. That boy was me. And what she didn't know was that the mic on her podium was still hot, live-streamed, audio recorded, archived. Later that week, she tried to purchase a luxury SUV, cash, straight from the business account. But what she didn't realize was that I'd already filed a hold on those funds through my legal petition. The payment bounced. The dealership flagged it. Her name hit a compliance watch list. Then she called the accountant, panicking, and that call was recorded too. I thought you said it was handled, she shouted. He was supposed to be out of the picture. That was the mistake. Not the insult, not the car, not the event. It was the arrogance, the belief that she'd already won, the belief that I'd rolled over and disappeared like she'd written me out of reality. But now, the recordings, the financial trail, the forged signatures, it was all stacking up, and her champagne toast, that was the match, the one that lit the courtroom on fire. She gave me what I couldn't find in all the bank statements and deposit boxes, intention. And now, her performance was about to end. Because once the mask slips, once the world sees what's really behind the smile, no amount of charm can put the pieces back together. When the courtroom doors opened, she walked in like it was an inconvenience. Like we were wasting her time. Expensive heels, hair pinned high, not a crack in her performance. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I had already seen what mattered. Every forged line, every shady bank transfer, every voice recording played frame by frame. The judge called it a pattern of undue influence and deceptive financial control over a cognitively declining individual. But I didn't need the legal terms. I already knew what it was. It was theft, of legacy, of memory, of blood. The forensic handwriting expert confirmed what I suspected. The signature on the new will wasn't authentic. It matched Clarice's writing in subtle but damning ways. The pressure points, the loops, the unnatural slant. My father's nurse testified next. He told me, I think she's changing things behind my back. But I don't want to fight. I'm tired. She said he'd started hiding cash in his sock drawer. That she once found him trying to scribble a note while Clarice was out getting groceries. And then, they played the voice memo. His voice, fragile, raspy, but clear. If anything happens, don't let her take it all. Check the deposit box. My son knows what to do. Those 17 seconds changed everything. Clarice went pale. Her fingers fidgeted with her bracelet. No more smiles. No more clever comebacks. And then came the ruling. The will? Invalidated. The estate? Frozen and reordered. The business? Transferred back to my control. The accounts? Audited. Reassigned. Her lawyer whispered to her, but her face said it all. She'd been dethroned by the one thing she underestimated. My silence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I stood, buttoned my jacket, nodded to the judge, and walked out. 2 weeks later, she came home to find a notice taped to the front door. Formal, stamped, final, eviction. The locks were changed that afternoon. The same house she said I didn't belong in, now no longer belonged to her. No confrontation, no screaming match, just a quiet storm, one she never heard coming until it was already too late. Because justice isn't loud. Sometimes it walks in dressed like paperwork. Sometimes it comes in the form of an email, a ruling, a name, restored. And in that silence, I found my peace. The day after the eviction, Clarice didn't call, didn't show up. But people around us, they started talking. Vendors who once stopped answering my calls, they emailed back, apologizing for the confusion. Old clients who had been rerouted quietly reached out, asking if I was officially back in charge. Everyone suddenly remembered my name. Funny how quickly people change sides once the power shifts. Some were shocked, said they had no idea what was going on. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just didn't want to. Others, like my Aunt Sheila, just nodded and said, "I knew you'd find a way." Clarice didn't make a public scene. That wasn't her style, but she made her statement in the only way she knew how. Silence. No apology, no denial. She just vanished. And honestly, that told me everything. Because sometimes the loudest scream isn't a slap or a lawsuit. It's the look in someone's eyes when they realize they lost control. That all the strings they pulled snapped. That the quiet one, the one they erased, belittled, underestimated, never stopped remembering. I walked through the front door of my father's house a week later. Same scent, same creaky floorboard by the hallway. I placed the handwritten note back where I found it, inside a small wooden box above the mantel. I stood in his office, alone, in the chair where she once sat giving orders. And I whispered, "We're good now, Dad." Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming what was mine. Quietly, fully, completely. No gloating, no press release, no show, just a name, restored, and for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. I don't think you go through something like this and come out the same. I'm not the man I was when this started. I used to think silence meant strength, because I didn't want to be like them, the loud ones, the cruel ones, the ones who made noise just to drown out the truth. But I've learned that silence can also be sharp. It cuts, it isolates, and it can turn a loyal son into a stranger in his own story. There was a time when all I wanted was a thank you, a nod, a seat at the table I helped build. But now, I don't need permission to take up space. I walk into my father's office every morning, open the blinds, turn on the lights, and sit behind the desk he once ruled from. But I don't sit the same way he did. I don't just build the business. I protect the memory. I've put his name back where it belongs, on the wall, on the documents, on the front gate. But I added mine too. Not as a son, as a man who earned it. Do I still wish it had ended differently? Of course. I wish he'd had the strength to stand up to her. I wish I hadn't stayed quiet for so long. I wish I could have looked him in the eyes one last time and said, "I kept my promise." But grief has its own language, and sometimes the only closure you get is becoming the man you were meant to be, with or without the apology. I don't hate her. She taught me more than she ever intended. She taught me that some people don't want a family. They want control. That not every smile is safe. That loyalty without boundaries becomes a weapon against yourself. And she taught me the most powerful lesson of all. They can erase your name from paper, but not from memory, not from blood, not from truth. I'm quieter now, a little colder maybe, a little more careful about who I let close. But I'm also clear, and if peace means choosing myself, even when it's lonely, then so be it, because I didn't fight for money. I fought for meaning, and I won. There's one thing they couldn't take. It wasn't in the will. It wasn't tied to a bank account. It didn't need a lawyer's signature. It was a key, old, rusted around the edges, worn teeth, a tiny chip on the handle where my father once dropped it while fixing the front door in the rain. That key opened the side gate to our shop. The gate we used before the business was official, before we had clients, before we had contracts, before we had her. He handed it to me when I was 16, said, "If you've got this, you're part of it." I kept it on my key ring. Even after she locked me out, even after the name was changed. I almost threw it away once. The night I sat in the truck outside the locked office, humiliated and forgotten. I held it between my fingers and thought, what's the point of a key that doesn't open anything anymore? But I didn't toss it. I tucked it in my glove box, and I left it there. Until the day the judge handed the business back to me. I went straight to that gate. Same rust, same squeak, same memory. I took that old key out, slid it into the lock, and it turned. Smooth, effortless. Like time never passed. Like the place remembered me even if he didn't. I stood there, holding it in my hand, realizing this was never about money. It was about access, legacy, memory. They changed the documents, but not the metal. Not the weight of that small, quiet thing still choosing to open for me. So now I keep it in my desk drawer, not for utility, for remembrance. Because that key, it's everything she couldn't erase. It's the proof that no matter how deep betrayal cuts, some locks were always meant for your hands, and some names were never meant to be written out. Justice came quiet, slow, clean. She lost everything she stole, and I didn't have to touch a single thing. I walked away with the truth, the name, and the key, and I thought that was the end. But what I didn't know was she wasn't done yet. Not entirely, because some people don't know how to lose, and sometimes the real storm doesn't start when you strike. It starts when they realize you still have something left to lose. Sometimes I still wonder, was I wrong to protect what was mine? Not out of rage, not out of revenge, but out of something deeper, loyalty. Blood, the belief that a man's name should mean something, that silence shouldn't be mistaken for surrender. Some people said I should have walked away. Let her have it. It's just stuff, they said. But it wasn't just stuff. It was a life, a story, a legacy, a father's last breath left in my hands. So I ask you, what would you have done? If someone rewrote your story and signed it without your permission, would you have let them publish the lie? Or would you have written your name back in quietly, boldly, without apology. I didn't do this for money. I did it because when a man gives you everything he has, and someone tries to bury it with a smile, you don't let them walk away with the shovel. Not out of anger, out of duty. So no, I don't regret it. And if that makes me cold, then maybe cold is what you become when you've been left out in it for too long. They didn't take everything. They just lit the match and assumed I'd burn with it. But I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood still. I waited. I listened. And when the time came, they handed me the rope, and I let them tie the knot themselves. You didn't hear her side. You won't. You didn't hear the lawyer explain it in court, or the nurse recount what she saw. You didn't need to. This was never about them. This was about what I saw, what I lived, what I carried in silence while everyone else clapped for the performance she was putting on. You only heard my voice, because for a long time, it was the only one that remembered the truth. And now that it's been spoken, I don't need anyone else's version. Not hers, not theirs, not even yours. I lived it, and that is enough. So now I ask you, what would you have done? If someone rewrote your story, tore out your name, claimed your blood, silenced your voice, would you have walked away? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have done what I did? Waited, watched, let them get comfortable, then reminded them that the son they buried still knew where the truth was kept? Would you have fought back, or just faded out like they wanted? What do you do when the people you once fed turn and starve you out of your own home? Tell me, because maybe I'm not the only one who's had to rebuild after being erased. Maybe you've lived it too. And if so, then this story wasn't just mine, it was ours.